I'm speaking today about innovations without limits, imagining a possible inclusive future for researchers. And I want to give an audio description of myself for those who need it. So I am a white woman in her late 30s. I have long dark hair. I'm currently wearing a blue dress and a black top. And behind me is an aspirational background of somebody else's bookcase, because probably like many of you, I had to find a space to carve out to set up a home office that didn't exist before pandemic times. So this is not real. It is just an aspirational bookcase. I mean, I would love to have roses behind me every day, but so that's just a fake bookcase behind me. I'm choosing this image here on the title slide of multiple mirrors in which you can see different angles of a street scene. It's a street scene in Japan where there's an escalator in view and there's stairs in view, and there's a person in view as well. And I've chosen this because I want to talk about the issue of inequalities as something that cannot be tackled through one lens, with one perspective, one discipline, one angle. Because if we could tackle it with one discipline, one angle, one perspective, we would have already solved these problems. So I want us all to think about what it means to think about the issues of inequalities, systemic institutional inequalities through multiple lenses, in community with each other, with multiple perspectives, multiple disciplines involved in trying to solve those inequalities. Who I am, thanks to Gagnon giving a bit of an intro to me. I'm currently a research fellow at the University of Strathclyde for the STEM Equals Project, a project focused on the experiences of women and LGBT folks in STEM. I'm from next month joining the University of Manchester as a lecturer in education. And I'm actually very sad to leave STEM Equals and very excited to start at Manchester, so it's mixed feelings. I'm focused on inequalities, particularly in higher education, but inequalities also in the workforce. It's a tough topic to be focused on. And I think that today I'll cover a lot of those tough things. I'd just like to give a bit of a content warning that I am going to talk about systemic inequalities and the lived experiences of racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, classism, bullying, harassment, abuse. So these are really difficult topics to cover, topics that a lot of you may have experience with or have experienced in your career so far. And for most of my 20 minutes, I think that it will feel like the future is bleak, and I'm sorry for that, but I just want to give you the hope that, that there is a possible better future out there. So please bear with in that I will cover some really difficult material first, but that I promise that I will end on a note of hope and what's possible. So I'm going to cover very briefly research past using two extraordinary women. I'm going to talk about research present, including a whistle-stop tour of a few of the systemic inequalities that we are facing. And I'm going to talk about research future, what could be, what potentially is coming, good or bad, as we consider what could be possible in a better, more equal world. So to talk about research past, I've chosen these two extraordinary women. Some of you may already be familiar with their work. I hope in the chat that you might be able to, I can't see the chat, so hopefully if anybody has already recognized these two women, they might put in the chat and points to you for knowing who they are already. So on the left is Henrietta Lacks. And Henrietta Lacks was a Black woman who died in 1951, an American woman at the age of 31 from cancer. And her cells were harvested from her without her knowledge or permission. And those cells became what's called HeLa, the HeLa line of cells, H-E-L-A as in Henrietta Lacks. And Henrietta, some of you may already be familiar with, Henrietta Lacks, a statue of her was just unveiled this month in Bristol. It's the first statue of a Black woman by a Black artist publicly unveiled in the UK. And I think it's important to talk about her as one of the two women I talk about when I talk about research past, because of the, she represents the poor ethics, which is a really mild way to say the violence done against, in this case, particularly Black bodies within medical research. So the ways that medical research exploited, endangered, killed a lot of particularly marginalized groups, including Black people. So Henrietta Lacks' family were able to get acknowledgement that her cell lines are the HeLa cell lines. The HeLa cells have enabled endless numbers of medical innovations and breakthroughs. And her family has been able to sue some companies for use of her cells without acknowledgement or without recognition of the ways they've benefited financially and through innovation of her cells that were taken without her permission. On the right, you may also recognize Rosalind Franklin. So a British scientist whose work was vital to understanding our understandings of DNA, and whose work was co-opted by her colleagues, in this case, Watson and Crick and Wilkins. And so her work is what led to the understanding and discovery of the double helix for DNA. Crick and Watson and Wilkins were later awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology of Medicine in 1962. She should have been named also in that prize, but she had passed away in 1958 at the age of 37 from cancer. And the Nobel Prize is not awarded posthumously, though it should be in this case, or in many cases, when her work was vital to our understandings of DNA and what led to that award. So that's research past, and I want to use these two women as examples of the ways that particular voices have been exploited, have been misrecognized, have been ignored, contributions that have led to innovation in science and research, in our understandings of the world, and the ways that a lot of those contributions are not recognized from particular groups. I'm switching now to research present, and I'm hoping in the chat, once again, some of you may be familiar with these two professors. A lot of my discussion today will be very UK focused, but I also know that the inequalities I'm about to talk about are not UK only. So hopefully you can share in the chat the ways that these same inequalities may be impacting you in whatever country you're joining us from. So in 2020 HESA data here in the UK indicates that about 21,000 professors in the UK there are 21,000 professors in the UK. That was as of 2020. 140 of those 21,000 professors are Black, and 25 of those professors in particular are Black women. So 21,000 professors in the UK. Again, 140 are Black and 25 are Black, specifically Black women. So on the left, you have Professor Dorothy Monacoso. She's a professor of computer science. As of 2020, she was the only Black woman professor in computer science. And she's at Leeds Beckett University. And on the right, you have Professor Chris Jackson. He's a professor of sustainable geoscience at the University of Manchester. So my future colleague over at the University of Manchester. And last year in 2020, Professor Jackson gave the Royal Institute Christmas Lecture. He was the first Black scientist to give that lecture since it founded in 1825. And I want to talk about the fact that in our research present, we are still having these firsts. You know, here we are in 2020, 2021, and we're still having these firsts. So this is something to consider as we think about what the future should look like. So I'm going to give you a whistle-stop tour. These are just a few of the ways that inequalities are shaping researchers' experiences in the UK. In the UK, more than 1 in 5 PhD students indicated that they have experienced discrimination or harassment. 1 in 4 PhD students indicated they have been bullied. Nearly 2/3 of postdoctoral researchers, 61%, have witnessed bullying or harassment, and 43% have experienced it themselves. All of these links are available on the slides that Tony shared, and we can share the slides again later. Just 1 in 3 postdoctoral researchers feel comfortable speaking up about bullying and harassment. So just 37% of postdoctoral researchers feel like they are safe to talk about bullying and harassment. And many doubted that any action or appropriate action would be taken. More than 1 in 3 PhD students have sought help for anxiety or depression caused by their PhD. More than half of postdoctoral researchers have sought or wanted to seek help for anxiety or depression, and this compares to only 14% of postgraduate researchers reported having low anxiety, and that compares to 41% of the general population. Nearly 1 in 4 Black, Indigenous, and other people of color students reported experiencing racial harassment in the UK. White applicants are more likely to be offered a PhD place in the UK. Concern has been raised that the process for selecting UKRI-funded PhD students discriminates against applicants from underrepresented backgrounds, including BIPOC applicants, disabled applicants, and applicants from low socioeconomic backgrounds. So some studies have shown that women are more likely to withdraw from their doctoral studies and take longer to complete than men. And the gender gap in completion rates is worse where a woman is the only or one of only a few women in her PhD cohort. In a survey of LGBTQ plus doctoral researchers in the UK, only 33% of respondents indicated that they were out to their whole supervisory team. And more than half of respondents reported experiencing aggression or microaggression because of their sexual and or gender identity. In a report of findings titled Exploring the Workplace for LGBT plus Physical Scientists, whether respondents were out at work varied. So only 9% of respondents who identified as non-binary were out, 14% of bisexual and pansexuals, shout out to my fellow bisexual and pansexuals, 21% of queer and questioning folks, 30% of trans people, 38% of lesbians, and 44% of gay people. And I think if you're not already considering this, is what about our institutions makes it unsafe to be out? Because I will talk later about the fact that often we see our institutions suggesting to come out for Pride Month, be out, be proud. But what are our institutions doing to make it safe to be out, to make the choice to be out safely without fear of repercussions, without fear of abuse? And this is the last slide, just focused on some of the inequalities data. I know it's a lot. Disabled researchers face discrimination and additional burdens in the workplace. Disability disclosure rates are higher for permanent academic staff than for those on contracts. And that shouldn't be the case. They should be near par, because obviously people on permanent contracts aren't more likely to be disabled than people on temporary contracts. So if it was safe to disclose disability, more staff would be disclosing disability on contracts, not just having those different disclosure rates. Doctoral and postdoctoral researchers engaged in teaching are subjected to biased student evaluations. Really, any of us engaged in teaching are subjected to biased student evaluations, but just thinking about how that shapes researchers' careers and all of our careers, really. It's a really great, terrible article, but a really great review of literature from Troy Heffernan there. And by terrible, I don't mean the article is terrible, I mean the data is terrible as far as the structural inequalities when it comes to biases in student evaluations. 78% of doctoral researchers, postdoctoral researchers think that high levels of competition have created unkind and aggressive working conditions. I would agree. I wonder how many of you think that competition has created aggression rather than collaboration leading to innovation. More than 3 out of 4 PhD researchers indicated they're working 41 or more hours a week on their PhD. And we know that overwork and burnout have become commonplace in academia for staff and for students. But not everyone can engage in overwork. So for example, for those with caring responsibilities, for those who are disabled, but really no one should have to work more hours than are conducive to good health and well-being. And I think that's not part of the discussion. Overwork and burnout have become commonplace, but no one should have to work more hours than is conducive to good health or well-being. And I think importantly, in recognition of those who cannot do this work, we need to be pushing against this commonplace thing. So we need to push against this overwork as common and required of us for career advancement. And finally, nearly 1 in 4 PhD students would change their supervisor if they could go back and start again. And I think that's important as we consider how we can best support researchers in their development in their careers, in making sure that they can thrive in their research. So I want to talk about the benefits of inclusive research cultures, and it's the reason why I'm talking about innovation and inclusion in the same presentation. So studies have found that inclusive working cultures can result in higher productivity of underrepresented staff. In engineering, for example, this is true amongst engineers who are LGBTQ+, women, and BIPOC engineers. Studies have shown that increased diversity and inclusion in the workforce contributes to better innovation, more resilient organizations, and greater economic growth. So we should be talking about innovation when we talk about inclusion. These are not separate things. Often inclusion is talked about as something that might be done by a couple staff in the EDI team at your university, ticking some boxes, doing the bare minimum reports required by the government. But our innovation is hampered when we are not working within inclusive environments. What we're able to accomplish together as researchers, as communities that include research, is hampered by having environments that are burdened by inequalities, individuals and environments burdened by inequalities. Specifically here, Hofstra's team at the University of Stanford found that women and BIPOC researchers introduced scientific novelty at higher rates than white men across all disciplines, but they're less likely to benefit within their own careers from the contributions they make to innovation. So they're innovating, introducing more scientific novelty, more so than their white male counterparts, but that's not leading to benefits or furthering of their careers. So we need to reframe the narrative around inclusion. So creating inclusion is not something nice that our institutions do as a favor for those of us who represent one or more marginalized or underrepresented groups within research communities. Inclusion is essential for innovation. Inclusion is the way that we innovate. Without it, we are not going to be making those breakthroughs. We are not going to be leading the way for the future. So it's not EDI work, the inclusion work that needs to be done is not a favor. It is something our institutions should be investing in when it comes to money and staff time, because otherwise they will fall behind on innovation and economic growth. Switching now to Research Future. When I did a search for future in stock photos, there were really two styles of the future when it came to stock photography. There were dystopic wastelands of crumbling buildings and a really sort of Mad Max style of the future. So on the left, you've got this crumbling building. This is a stock photo of quote unquote the future. And on the right, there were the other sort of side of what the future means, according to stock photography, were robots or virtual reality. So, on one side, we have a crumbling dystopia, and the other side, we have innovative technology that leads to the ways we can connect more and better in this sort of positive future. And I think these two are really interesting because I think that we have this potential for a future that could be inclusive, that could be innovative, where we could connect with each other. But we also certainly have a potential for a future in research that's more a dystopia, crumbling buildings where we're unable to move forward. I want to talk about, in thinking about the future and how we might imagine the future. I attended an event years ago organized by Mark Kerrigan called Design Fiction for Sociologists. So the term design fiction was coined by Julian Bleecker. And I'm going to quote from the event. So this is a direct quote. Design fiction isn't science fiction. It's a way of trying to envision and interrogate possible futures based on research data, current trends, and/or technologies. So it's the way that we think about the future, not as this science fiction imagining, but it's the way that we think about the future based on what we know about existing data. And there are plenty of fields where that is done as standard practice. So in economics, to forecast the future is expected. So economists are, of course, thinking ahead about what the economy might do in the future based on available existing data. But it's not necessarily something that we do in a lot of other fields, a lot of other disciplines, where we think about the future, we imagine what the future could look like based on the available data, not just a fantasy of what the future could look like, but what could the future look like based on the trends and research data we currently have. And I will say that based on the current trends, particularly because the pandemic has worsened and deepened existing inequalities. So based on our current trends, realistically, I think we're headed more for the image on the left, the dystopic, crumbling society on the left. I mean, not perhaps as bad as all that, but I want to also talk about the potential for the image on the right as our potential future. And as I suggested in my abstract, I want to consider a future in which institutional diversity statements are accompanied by robust evidence of accountability for those promises of equity. So it's not enough for our institutions to say we are committed to diversity or we're committed to equality. Show us that commitment. Be transparent about the work that needs to be done as an institution, and show us the work that you are doing, the money you're investing as an institution in fixing these issues, because just saying you're committed to equality isn't enough. The statement itself isn't enough. It's not enough for our institutions to raise a rainbow flag during Pride Month or to tweet that Black Lives Matter. We want to know what they're actually doing to invest in fixing the problems that are so deeply embedded. So I think there is a way for us to imagine a better future, but I think it's by especially keeping our institutions accountable and not expecting the individuals are the ones who are going to do the work to change themselves. I want to talk about two potential outcomes for the future. So this is, if you're not familiar with hostile design or hostile architecture, it's where something is designed usually outside, in this case, to prevent our most vulnerable in society, people who are homeless, from resting. So if you're not familiar already with hostile design, this is, when you see spikes outside, they're meant to keep people away from resting. And spikes are also used to keep birds away. So it's really dehumanizing to keep human beings away in the way that we might keep animals away. And I think the image on the left, which is a rainbow bench, but in which there's brackets throughout the bench to make it harder to rest. I think this, for me, that image on the left is currently what we're facing in academia. So the meme reads, "When you're inclusive but still hate the poor." And I think, when our institutions put up their rainbow flags or put up their pride statements on Twitter, this is what it feels like, is this image on the left. Because those statements and those rainbow flags are not accompanied by actual work the institution is doing to make it safer to choose to be out if you want to. So it's not enough to put up, in this case, put up a bench and then paint it rainbow and then claim that that's somehow inclusion. And so I want to be able to talk about the ways that academia does a good show of pretending that inclusion matters, but actually isn't doing the work to make sure people feel included and welcomed, and that issues like harassment and abuse and prejudice are not part of their experience. So I know I'm running out of time, but I want to give two quotes here. This is a quote by Sarah Ahmed on the illusion of inclusion. She says, "I have suggested that diversity can work as a branding exercise, a way of reimagining the organization as being diverse through the inclusion of those who embody diversity. And inclusion can be a happy sign of the overcoming of exclusion. If your arrival is a sign of diversity, then your arrival can be incorporated as good practice. Bodies of color provide organizations with tools, ways of turning action points into outcomes. We become the tools in their kit. We are ticks in their boxes. We tick their boxes." And similarly, here is a quote by Professor Kalwant Bhopal from her book, White Privilege. "Universities have a commitment to equality of opportunity. However, the mere existence of equality and diversity policies does not suggest that good practice is taking place. Many universities may simply conform to a tick box exercise, which gives the illusion that they are tackling racial inequality. Simply asserting a commitment to equality is different from demonstrating how equality and inclusion are practiced." I'm going to skip ahead, although again, my slides will be available because I want to talk about what it could look like if we imagined a better future. And do feel free to please read the slides I wasn't able to read, because some of them include anonymous quotes from some powerful stories from current researchers. So I'd like to think about what our future could look like in research by using the analogy of the desire path. So the desire path is, this is where a park might be designed, but it's used differently by its users. So in the middle image, you can see that a path has been tread by users of this park that is different from the path that was laid out structurally by those who designed the system. And I think that if we, as a community of researchers and a community of folks who are part of the research that's done at universities, including those who support researchers, if we expect our institutions to change without our work towards that, I think it's not going to happen. We need to keep our institutions accountable. We need to be together collectively treading that path together. And that is that sort of centered desire path. And I'm giving you two other examples of the ways that our institutions could respond to us pressuring them to make change. So on the left is where, in this case, a city council has decided they don't like the desire path that's been created by users of the park, and they've put grass over it. But on the right is an example of where a desire path has become formal and then become, in this way, more usable. So if we think about, if we are treading a path forward, are our colleagues behind us, our colleagues who are more excluded from the system, able to tread that path? And is there a way that we can keep our institutions accountable for making that path usable by everyone after us, even after we've forged ahead? So I want us to consider how we can challenge the structures in place that exclude, limit, or restrict who's able to access and navigate through, be a part of the research community. So thinking collectively, communally about how we could be forging paths together, paths that we hope will enable more people to join us, for more people to be part of this journey, and new ways of thinking about how our community can work together out with the restrictions and limits that have been placed by the structures that burden us with inequalities. And so again, I ask, what might the future look like if we were doing that? What might a re-envisioned, a reimagined academia and research culture look like if we were forging our own paths outside of the restrictive ones that we are currently working within. And I know I've gone over my time. I apologize for that. So thank you so much for having me.